I'd like to share with you a really splendid game played with the Sicilian Kalashnikov. It's always really nice when I'm checking out the latest games to see that the opening is still working very well indeed. And this game features one of the key ideas that I highlighted in my book, the Trojan horse pawn sacrifice. And this is very, very dangerous for the unwary. So this game was played a little earlier in the year at the Southwest Class Championship in Fort Worth, Texas. Playing white, an FM, Samuel Padhya from India. Playing black, a Grandmaster, Norris Delgado Ramirez, who's originally from Cuba, now representing Paraguay. Of course, if you want to find out more about the Trojan horse and the opening, then do check out my book, or indeed my Chessable course. In the meantime, hope you enjoy this game. Here we go. E4, C5, and knight C6. D4, open Sicilian. That's exchanged. And E5. So this challenges white straight away. And there's only one really decent option for white here. The other moves allow black to equalize very easily. And that's knight b5, but this starts to get complicated because after d6, now this is the Kalashnikov, then of course this knight is a little bit misplaced. So this is what makes this position interesting and already challenges white. Now here white has a choice principally between two main lines, bringing the knight out straight away or playing c4. So the Marozzi bind, really clamping black in the centre. But the disadvantage of this is that there's a big gap on d4. And on a good day, that knight can land on that beautiful square. g6, so this is the way that I recommend in the book, in the course. I think it gives black dynamic chances once the bishop reaches g7. Knight c3. Now it's time to push the knight away before this one lands on d5. So a6, the knight is pushed back to a3. Bishop e6, that's usually where this bishop wants to end up. Covering d5, also looking at c4. Very chunky square. Knight c2, so the knight hops back to cover d4, and yeah, it's not doing too much on a3 anyway. Rook c8, but once the knight has gone from a3, then c4 could be vulnerable. And just in general, that's where you want the rook in these Sicilian positions with a semi-open file. Bishop e3, that looks like the best square for the bishop, covering d4. Bishop g7. Now, bishop e2, bishop d3 are normal moves here, but white plays knight d5, so plonks the knight in straight away. Move order in this opening is so varied. You know, white can play with the knight on a3, with the knight on c2, the bishop on e2 or d3. So I think, of course, memorizing certain variations can be good, but actually you have to get a feel for this kind of position. Delgado makes a practical decision and decides doesn't want to live with that knight on d5, and he exchanges it off straight away. It's interesting, the computer actually thinks that f5 is a decent move here. I'm always very reluctant to advance the f pawn, particularly when it opens, you know, this diagonal. But in fact, after this check, the king just steps to f8, and then, well, the queen will come to e8. The queen can be pushed away or exchanged off. Actually, black, well, according to the computer, black is okay here. I mean, certainly in this case, those two central pawns look pretty nice. Of course, white doesn't need to take, but okay, it's very interesting continuation, quite double-edged. Okay, let's come back here. So, as I said, Delgado makes the practical decision to exchange off the knight. Now, different options. E-pawn, C-pawn, or queen. C takes d5 played. Well, if E takes d5, then the knight hops back here, and actually this can be rather interesting for black once that knight comes to f5. You know, these pawns at a certain point are going to roll down the board. This is the classic steamroller kingside pawn majority. But okay, c takes d5 played, so that's the kind of, you could say, the standard way of recapturing. And if the knight retreats, well, it's possible. But, you know, white has the two bishops, it might be possible to press on the queen side. But knight d4 is the classic Kalashnikov move. This is what I call the Trojan horse. So you're prepared to give up a pawn, but you get tremendous play for it. Now white decides to take the pawn. So a game in my database where white actually played bishop d3 there. And, well, I'm going to record another video on that for my patrons. If you're interested, then sign up to my Patreon channel. So I'll come back to that. But white decided to exchange off and take the pawn. Okay, so what's black got for this pawn? Well, first of all, a check. And that's very disruptive. Of course, the queen can't interpose because there'll be an exchange, and then bishop takes bishop. So the king has to step forward. Okay, well, straight away we can see that black has some compensation because the king is very oddly placed in front of the bishop. But there's no sort of immediate follow-up here. The best that black can do is just develop. And then king f3 was played to guard the e-pawn. I mean, white can get away with this because black isn't yet developed. So black hastens to castle, and then bishop d3, so that secures the e-pawn. Now, it'd be really nice to sort of break through in the middle, but this just isn't good enough. Basically, after this, it's an extra piece. White is secure. But this is a very nice move, knight d7. So it's not spectacular, but positionally very sound and very typical for these Trojan horse pawn sacrifices. So basically, after the exchange of bishops, you can see that knight might come to one of those dart squares. And the dart squares, that's where white is weak. There's no dart square bishop. So black can try and operate there. I mean, not just with the knight, of course, but, you know, with the queen as well. Rook e1, so white is developing. I know the king looks slightly odd here, but there's nothing attacking it at the moment. And actually, the best move here is to play queen b4 and then slide the queen over on the dart squares. And actually, this is a very dangerous initiative. White has to be extremely careful. I mean, one of the ideas is, so for example, bishop f1, a check, and then g5. So it threatens mate in 2, like this. And again, this move g5, incredibly common in this kind of Trojan horse pawn sacrifice. So secures the f4 square. And that means that black has greater control over e5. So very decent compensation there for black. But Delgado played rook ce8. Still extremely dangerous. But it gives white a little chance here. So I'd like you to have a think here. How do you play with white? How easy is it to defend this position? Well, not at all easy, as we're going to find out. But what would you play with white here? So you have a think, I'll have a drink. White play, what would you do next? Cheers. Do you want to improve your chess? Get access to live masterclasses with yours truly? Then subscribe to patreon.com/PowerPlayChess, and for just $25 a month, you get a newsletter with a test game, calculation puzzles, a monthly opening survey, access to an archive with over 100 opening surveys. And you can join in live masterclasses exclusive to patrons where you can ask me questions directly over Zoom. All for only $25 per month. Do subscribe to patreon.com/PowerPlayChess and join the club. I think one of my first thoughts here would be to play g3 to tuck the king back to g2. This wasn't played. But actually black gets really good compensation here with f5. Now that can't be taken because of the exchange, and then knight e5, and well, the attack is just too strong, you know. King here, queen takes d5, and basically the king is in massive trouble. So the king would have to come back to g2, but then f4, and this gives black very nice compensation. So that f-pawn is pretty menacing. You never know when that's going to open up, but knight looks really good looking at d3 and f3. White has problems on the dark squares, basically. So very typical for this kind of Trojan horse sacrifice. The best move is actually king g3, stepping in front of the pawns. But I mean, black clearly has very decent compensation here. But you know, it's the best chance for white to survive. But white played g4, so clearly wanted to discourage black from playing f5. But g4 is a very risky move. Whenever you advance pawns, they weaken the squares to the side of them and behind as well. And well, the bad bishop bounce is a very common theme in the Kalashnikov, where this bishop bounces round via d8 to b6. But sometimes we've had a bad queen bounce, and this, I think we've got a queen bounce here. Queen d8, really nice. So that queen, whoops, misfired. That queen wants to land on h4 or maybe g5 or f6, and white's king is in trouble. King g3, I think, is necessary to prevent queen h4, but now h5. So that starts to open up the king. Now if g takes h5, and check. Now the queen can't interpose because that wins a piece. There we go, that knight bouncing in very nicely. So f4 played, but now after this exchange, black can use the h file, and this is very unpleasant for white. And white is still a pawn up, but basically these pawns have just gone too far, and behind those pawns is a big vacuum, and black's pieces just want to flood in, and every single one of black's pieces is in play. I'm counting the queen as well. It's about to come to b6, and this is so difficult to defend. Bishop c2 played, queen b6, there we are, so hits that one. Would like to come in here, and I mean, this is very, very nasty. Rook e1, queen takes b2, so white is trying to put up some kind of defense, but it's all in vain. Queen c3 check, queen c4. That keeps an eye on all these pieces. That's very uncomfortable. Queen f3 comes back to support the e-pawn, and rook h4. So the pressure is increasing. So black might double on the h file. We'll have to see. In fact, white now misses a tactic. I can imagine that time pressure was involved. h3 played, rook takes f4. Simple deflection, queen takes, and then queen takes, rook check. In fact, that's what happened. I mean, there really isn't anything better. And now we've reached an endgame where black is a pawn up. Now black is 2 pawns up, and it is the famous matter of technique, but this one really isn't difficult. Notice that knight. It's on that beautiful outpost, supported by a pawn. Can't be driven away by white's pawns, and this is a consequence of pawns being advanced. That there's nothing to drive that knight away. So it's just rock solid, and that makes the win for black very, very simple. b5. Okay, the knight bounced around to perhaps another excellent square. Well, in fact, it came back again once the b pawn, past b pawn has been created. And very soon white resigned. There we go. Rook a4. Picks up another one, and well, there's nothing that can be touched in black's position, basically. It's so secure. Notice the difference between black's king behind those pawns and white's king back here after g4, and then a little bit later on when we had this position, black's king completely secure, white's king with those advanced pawns in big trouble. I think classic positional compensation for black in this kind of Trojan horse pawn sacrifice. Now, as I said, for patrons, I'm going to give you an extra video because I want to show you the game where white played bishop d3, and this is a little bit different. So white plays more conservatively, not taking the pawn, but black still manages to get a superb position. Anyway, if you're interested in the Kalashnikov, as I said before, then do check out the book or the Chessable course.